The document was 11 pages long, single-spaced. My wife's family had paid $4,200 in legal fees to have it drafted, reviewed, and sealed. I know the exact figure because Claudia mentioned it with a kind of quiet satisfaction at dinner, the way someone mentions the price of something expensive when they want you to understand the caliber of the people you are dealing with. I signed it on a Tuesday morning in March, just after 8 o'clock. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside me, turned to page 11, and set my pen to the signature line. The pen was a Montblanc Meister stuck 149, black resin barrel, gold nib, the weight of it precise and familiar in my hand. I had signed every significant document of my professional life with that pen. 3 commercial building contracts. A software licensing agreement worth $4.7 million, the deed to a residential property portfolio generating $341,000 per year in passive rental income. Claudia's father, Gerald Ashworth, had not known about any of those things when he drafted the prenuptial agreement designed to leave me with nothing. That was, as it turned out, his most expensive mistake. Before we go further into Marcus's story, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. It is always extraordinary to see how far these stories travel. Your support genuinely means everything to this channel. If you're finding value in what you're hearing, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing so you never miss a story like this one. Now let's return to Marcus Webb and to the morning he picked up that pen. I need to go back 3 years to the evening I met Claudia Ashworth at an architectural symposium in the city's financial district. She was there on behalf of her father's property development company, the Ashworth Group, a name that meant something in this city the way a coat of arms means something in another century. Old money, old confidence. The kind of family that treats every room they walk into as a room they already own. Claudia was different, I thought then. She was warm in a way the room was not. She laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. She asked questions and then actually listened to the answers, a rarer quality than it should be at those events. We talked for 2 hours beside a window overlooking the harbor. I walked her to a cab just before midnight. She left her business card on the seat between us when she climbed out. I kept it. We dated for 14 months. I was careful. I am always careful, professionally and personally. It is perhaps the occupational hazard of being an architect. You spend your career thinking in structures, in load-bearing points, in what happens to a building when the foundation is compromised. I apply that thinking to most things in my life. I applied it to Claudia, and for 14 months, every test came back solid. She seemed uninterested in money in the way that only people who have always had enough can afford to be. She knew I was an architect. She knew I ran a small firm, Webb Design Associates, 12 employees, mid-size commercial and residential projects. She seemed to find that respectable. Modest, perhaps, by Ashworth standards, but respectable. She never asked about my finances. I never offered the information. I want to be precise about that point because it matters. I did not deceive Claudia. I simply did not perform my wealth for an audience that had not earned the right to see it. There is a difference. My father built his life on that distinction, and I built mine on it too. He passed away when I was 26. A quiet man who ran a small civil engineering consultancy and left me 2 things. A work ethic I have never fully outpaced, and a piece of advice I have carried so long I cannot remember the first time I heard it. Build slowly, he said. Build well, and never, under any circumstances, show a man the full weight of what you are carrying until you know exactly what he intends to do with the knowledge. I proposed to Claudia in November. She said yes before I had finished the question. The engagement dinner was at the Ashworth Estate, a Georgian manor 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of house that exists in old films about families with secrets. Gerald Ashworth presided at the head of the table with the comfortable authority of a man who has never once doubted that the world was arranged for his benefit. He was 61, silver-haired, the sort of handsome that expensive dentistry and a lifetime of unearned confidence will produce. He shook my hand and said, "Marcus, good name, solid." He said it the way a vet assesses a dog it isn't certain about. Claudia's mother, Patricia, kissed both my cheeks and called me the architect for the rest of the evening, as though the profession were a minor but forgivable eccentricity, like keeping tropical fish or writing poetry. Ryan Ashworth, Claudia's younger brother, 28, currently drawing a salary from his father's company in exchange for a title that no one could precisely define, sat across from me and spent the evening asking questions designed to establish a ceiling above my head. What kind of buildings? What neighborhoods? Mid-range commercial? So nothing landmark, right? Got it. I answered every question directly, politely, and without elaboration. I kept my wine glass 2/3 full throughout the meal so that no one could pour for me. I listened more than I spoke. When Gerald made his toast to the union of two fine families and to the future Claudia deserves, I raised my glass and said nothing. That was the first night. There would be many more like it. The prenup arrived 4 months before the wedding, delivered by courier to my firm's offices in a sealed manila envelope bearing the Ashworth Group letterhead. Inside was a cover letter from Gerald's solicitor, a man named Heron, at a firm with 3 surnames and no personality, and 11 pages of closely reasoned legal architecture designed to ensure that in the event of a divorce, I would leave the marriage with precisely what I had brought into it, as assessed and defined by Gerald Ashworth's legal team. I read it at my desk in under 20 minutes. Then I read it again, more slowly. Then I set it down, picked up my Mont Blanc, and began to make small, neat notations in the margins. To an ordinary man, to the man Gerald and Ryan Ashworth imagined me to be, this document would have been a humiliation. A formality to be swallowed with whatever dignity remained after being reminded that you were a guest in someone else's story. An architect of modest achievement marrying into one of the city's foremost property dynasties. Of course there was a prenup. Of course it was designed to protect them. Of course, but I was not that man. And the document, read carefully and in full, contained something far more interesting than a humiliation. It contained a flaw. Several of them, in fact. Legal imprecisions in the asset classification clauses that my solicitor, Daniel Vance, who had handled every significant transaction of my professional life for the past 7 years, would later describe as breathtaking, really. The kind of work that happens when an old money family assumes the other party is too unsophisticated to have retained good counsel. The prenup was designed to quarantine my assets from Claudia's, which meant that every asset I held that was not disclosed, categorized, and valued within its framework would be entirely unprotected by its terms and entirely invisible to it. A net designed to catch fish that swims above the net catches nothing at all. I called Daniel that afternoon. Read every word, I told him. I want to know exactly what this document does and exactly what it cannot reach. He called back the next morning. I could hear the faint pleasure in his voice, the way a craftsman sounds when he encounters another craftsman's sloppy work. Marcus, he said, this is extraordinary. Did they actually think you were going to sign this cold? I told him they absolutely did. Then we have work to do, he said, and I think you're going to find this rather satisfying. Before I tell you what Daniel and I built in the weeks that followed, I need to give you the full weight of what I was signing inside, because the prenup was not the beginning of the humiliation. It was simply the first time they put the humiliation in writing. It had been building for the better part of a year. Gerald's toast at the formal engagement party held at the Ashworth estate in January, 112 guests, a catered supper that cost more than my first car, lasted 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I know because I timed it later on the recording Claudia's mother had made for the family archive. It was, in many respects, an extraordinary piece of public oratory. It praised Claudia in considerable and genuine detail, her intelligence, her elegance, her taste, her instinct for quality. It referenced the Ashworth family's long history of marrying well, of selecting partners who understood what it meant to build something lasting. Then it arrived at me. Marcus is an architect, Gerald said, with the particular warmth of a man reading from a card he finds mildly puzzling. He builds things. We can respect that. Every foundation starts somewhere. A pause, a smile. A room full of people laughing softly at a joke I was not entirely sure I had understood. Every foundation starts somewhere. I held my glass. I did not drink from it. I did not look at Gerald. I looked at Claudia, who was laughing, not unkindly, but laughing, and I noted the sound carefully and placed it somewhere in my memory where I keep the things I do not intend to forget. I wrote it in the notebook the next morning. Gerald's toast, every foundation starts somewhere. 112 witnesses. I dated it and I closed the book and I did not speak of it to anyone. 3 weeks before the wedding, Gerald called me at the office. I assumed it was about the rehearsal dinner logistics or perhaps a question about the seating plan. Instead, he spent 30 seconds on pleasantries and then made his offer. I've been thinking, he said. After the wedding, you should come and work for us. We could use a man like you on the development side. Project liaison, maybe, coordinating between the build teams and the client-facing people. Good title, respectable salary. $62,000 a year to start, reviewed after probation. A pause, you'd be part of the family in a real sense. I think that matters, doesn't it? $62,000 a year, project liaison. I should clarify for the purpose of this story that my firm at that time was generating approximately $1.4 million in annual revenue, from which I drew a director's salary of $285,000. In addition to which, the framework software company I had co-founded 6 years earlier, an architectural design automation platform used by 14 of the largest construction conglomerates on the continent, had recently finalized its acquisition by Sterling Build Group for $4.7 million, of which my 63% founding stake had yielded $2.96 million after fees and taxes, sitting quietly in a structured investment account that no one in the Ashworth family had any reason to know existed. There was also the matter of the property portfolio, 8 residential units across 3 postcodes, total current market value $2.31 million. Rental income $341,000 per year, managed through a holding company registered in a name that bore no obvious relation to mine. Thank you, Gerald, I said. I'll give it some thought. That evening, in the leather notebook I kept locked in my desk drawer, a private record I had been maintaining since the engagement dinner, I wrote, job offer, project liaison, $62,000 per year. He thinks I should be grateful. I wrote it carefully in full. I always did. What struck me most was not the smallness of the number, it was the casualness of it. He had not agonized over the figure. He had not consulted anyone. He had arrived at $62,000 the way a man arrives at the price he'll pay for a piece of furniture, not after research, but from a gut feeling about its worth. About my worth. He had looked at me across 14 months of family dinners and come to a conclusion, and translated that conclusion into a number and presented it over the phone as a kindness. That number told me more precisely than anything Gerald had ever said aloud exactly how he saw me, and that clarity, painful as it was useful. I was added to the Ashworth family group chat 6 days before the wedding. It was presented as a logistical necessity, a way to coordinate the wedding week schedule between family members. It was, in practice, a window into the family's private register that they had apparently forgotten I could read. The first relevant message arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. Ryan, responding to a photograph his friend had posted of a new commercial development in the Harbor District, a striking mixed-use tower with a cantilevered observation deck, wrote, "Tell Marcus he can take notes. Maybe one day he'll get to design a garden shed." 4 people, including Claudia, sent the laughing emoji in response. I screenshot the exchange. I did not reply. 3 days later, Ryan posted a link to an article about an architecture firm that had gone into receivership, with the caption, "Career options for Marcus after the wedding lol." 8 laughing emojis. Claudia sent a stop it, followed 4 seconds later by a second laughing emoji. I took a screenshot. I put it in a folder on my phone I had labeled reference. I did not leave the chat. The messages continued after the wedding, though with slightly less frequency, as though the act of marriage had introduced a small, temporary restraint into Ryan's commentary. But the restraint didn't last. By the second month, during a family dinner at Gerald's estate where Ryan had drunk more than was advisable, he leaned across the table and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "You know, Marcus, you'd make a great barista. You've got the patience for it, very zen, very considered, little drawings on the foam and everything." Gerald did not correct him. Patricia looked briefly uncomfortable and changed the subject. Claudia laughed, then looked at me, then stopped laughing. I smiled. I wrote it down that night verbatim with the date and the attendees and the exact words. "You'd make a great barista. I have the patience for it. Very zen, very considered." I was, by this point, compiling a document that read like a technical specification for a demolition order. Precise, referenced, every weight-bearing point identified. This one I have turned over in my mind many times in the years since, not because it was the cruelest, but because it was the clearest. The moment where the thing I had half suspected became a thing I could no longer deny. It was a Saturday afternoon, 8 days before the wedding. I had come home early from a site visit, a residential conversion in the north of the city, one of my firm's smaller but more satisfying commissions. Claudia was in the bedroom. The door was 3/4 closed. I could hear her voice, low and rapid, the cadence of someone speaking on the phone to a person they trust completely. I am not proud of what I did next. I stood still in the hallway and listened. She was speaking to her father. I could tell from the formality that crept into her voice when she addressed him, a slight straightening of vowels, a tightening of syntax, as though she were always with him, giving a small performance. "I know, Dad." "I know, but he's kind, he's steady, and you know the company can use the tax structure." A pause. "No, he has no idea about the clause in Section 7. Another pause, longer this time. "It's not about that. It's about, look, I know what I'm doing. After 5 years, the asset review kicks in and we'll have everything reappraised on our terms." That's what Heron said, the sound of her walking to the window. "He signed it. He signed all of it. He's perfectly happy. He's not that kind of man, Dad. He trusts people. That's just who he is. He's not that kind of man. He trusts people." I stood in the hallway for what I estimate was approximately 45 seconds. Then I walked quietly to the kitchen, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat down at the table. The pain was there. I want to be honest about that. It was there, and it was real, and it was the particular kind of pain that comes not from surprise but from confirmation, the moment when a building you have been suspecting is unsound finally shows you the crack. It was the sound of a woman I had genuinely loved telling her father, with the casual confidence of someone describing a transaction, that I was a man who could be safely underestimated. I did not confront her. I did not walk into that bedroom and say what I had heard. I sat at the kitchen table and I let the pain do what pain does when you do not fight it. It moved through me and it settled, and when it settled, it had a different quality. It had hardened not into anger. Anger was too hot and too imprecise for what I needed. It hardened into something cold and structural, into a kind of absolute load-bearing resolve. I did not feel broken. I felt, for the first time since receiving that 11-page document in its sealed manila envelope, entirely certain about what happened next. The week before the wedding brought a final sequence of small cruelties that I documented with the same methodical care I apply to a technical specification. On Monday, Gerald brought his business partners, 2 men in their 50s who ran a private equity firm that co-invested with the Ashworth Group, to the rehearsal dinner. I was introduced as the architect with the same faint emphasis I had come to recognize as Gerald's shorthand for small but harmless. One of the men asked what I was working on. I told him about the harbor conversion. He nodded in the way people nod when they are already thinking about the next conversation. "Lovely," he said, "very craft-forward." He turned back to Gerald before the sentence had fully landed. On Wednesday, Ryan posted a photo to his personal Instagram, a photo from the engagement party, the one in which I was standing slightly apart from the group, holding my wine glass, looking at something off camera. The caption read, "Future brother-in-law looking like he's calculating his hourly rate. Keep hustling, bro." 312 likes. Several people I had met at Ashworth family events were in the comments. The comments were not kind. On Thursday, Patricia Ashworth took Claudia shopping for something she described as a final wedding gift, a piece of jewelry from a boutique in the old town, something Claudia had been wanting for a long time. She called me on the way home to tell me about it. She was happy. She was genuinely happy, and in that moment I was reminded of the woman beside the harbor window, the woman with the business card on the seat, the woman who had laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. I held that image carefully. I knew I would need it later in the aftermath of everything to remind myself that the story was more complicated than a single overheard phone call. But the story was the story. And it was almost time to tell it. I went home that Thursday evening, opened the leather notebook, and wrote the last entry before the wedding. I listed every humiliation in order, with dates, with witnesses where relevant, with the exact language where I could recall it precisely. The notebook was 17 pages of close, careful handwriting by the time I closed it. Then I put it in the drawer, I locked the drawer, and I went to bed. The next morning I would marry Claudia Ashworth in a ceremony her father had paid for, at a venue her father had chosen, with flowers her mother had selected, and a menu that nobody had consulted me about. I wore a suit I had bought myself, navy bespoke from a tailor in the financial district I had been using since I was 32. I had chosen it without advice and without announcement. It fitted, as all well-made things do, perfectly. 3 weeks before the wedding, I sat in Daniel Vance's office on the 14th floor of a building I had always liked. a 1980s postmodern tower with a glass atrium that caught the afternoon light at a particular angle and threw it across the marble floor in long golden panels. Daniel was at his desk, reading, glasses pushed up onto his forehead, the prenuptial agreement open in front of him with his own notations covering both margins in a small, precise hand. "All right," he said. "Let me walk you through what this document can reach and what it cannot." He set the papers down and laced his fingers together in the way he does when he is about to explain something he finds both satisfying and faintly amusing. The agreement, as drafted, identifies and protects the following assets in the event of divorce: your directorship income from Web Design Associates, any future earnings from named commercial commissions, and your personal bank accounts as of the date of signing. That is the full extent of their legal reach. He looked at me over his glasses. The framework's proceeds, the $2.96 million from the Sterling acquisition, are held in a structured investment account under Frameworks Holdings Limited. That entity does not appear in this agreement, not once. He paused for effect. The property portfolio held through Meridian Residential Trust also entirely absent. Gerald's lawyers drafted a prenup to protect a wife from a mid-earning architect. They did not draft a prenup to protect anyone from a man of your actual position. I turned the pen over in my hand. What about the 5-year asset review clause, Section 7, the one that allows for an independent valuation review of marital assets after 5 years of marriage? Daniel smiled. Yes, that was meant to be their masterstroke. After 5 years, they can call for a full reappraisal of everything you hold. On paper, that sounds like a provision that catches anything they missed at the outset. But the clause specifies joint marital assets. Assets held individually in trust or corporate structure, established prior to the marriage and not voluntarily declared as marital property, fall outside its scope entirely. Again, these lawyers drafted a document to catch a man who had nothing to hide. They never considered a man who had a great deal to protect and the counsel to protect it properly. I was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the atrium caught a shift in the afternoon light and sent a new panel of gold across the floor, longer than the last. "So when I sign this," I said, "I am signing an agreement that protects them from a version of me that doesn't exist." "Precisely," Daniel said. "And in doing so, you are creating a sealed legal record that defines the boundary of their claim in perpetuity. Whatever happens, Marcus, whatever they try to argue later, they drew this map. They set these terms. They cannot subsequently claim to have not known the territory." He looked at me directly. Sign it in good faith, fully informed, and let them believe it is a leash, because it is not a leash. It is a perimeter fence around an empty field. Everything they care about is on the other side of it." I reached for the pen. The nib touched the paper with the same quiet certainty it always had. I signed. And then, because I am an architect and I have always believed in building one thing properly before starting the next, I spent the following 2 weeks doing something I had been preparing for quietly for 6 months. I opened a new company, Lodestone Systems, a structural analysis software platform for large-scale civil engineering contracts, co-founded with 2 former Frameworks colleagues whose talent I had trusted for a decade. Provisionally valued by a boutique investment firm at between $8 and $11 million ahead of a planned Series A funding round. Incorporated, structured, and entirely invisible to the 11 pages of Gerald Ashworth's legal ambition. I set the Mont Blanc in its case on the desk when it was done. Its cool, solid weight was the same as it had always been. The pen that signed the Frameworks contracts. The pen that signed the Meridian property deeds. The pen that had just signed Gerald Ashworth's careful trap. The same pen, the same hand, everything else was different. Daniel Vance had been my solicitor since I was 29 years old. I had been introduced to him through my father's estate, a modest affair, a terraced house in the east of the city, and a civil engineering consultancy worth rather less than its owner had believed. And we had worked together closely enough in the years since that I considered him something close to a friend, though Daniel is not a man who uses that word carelessly. He was 53, the sort of slim and precise that suggests decades of early mornings and considered eating. He had a dry, clipped sense of humor that appeared without warning in the middle of otherwise serious conversations, like a structural joke hidden in a technical report. He was, in my professional experience and personal estimation, the best legal mind I had ever encountered. not because he was brilliant in the showy, adversarial way of certain courtroom lawyers, but because he thought in architecture. He understood structure. He understood where weight was carried and where it was not, and he understood, which was rarer still, the difference between a load-bearing wall and a decorative one. "I want to be clear about one thing," he said near the end of that meeting in the atrium building. "My role in what you're planning is legal and structural. I am not here to punish Claudia or her family. I am here to ensure that when the time comes, you are standing on ground that cannot be moved beneath you. What you choose to do from that position is entirely your decision." "I understand," I said. "And the timing," he continued. "You mentioned the Ashworth Foundation Gala in September. That is 6 months into the marriage. Do you have a reason to wait that long?" I thought about the overheard phone call, about the 5-year clause, about the careful, patient way Gerald Ashworth had invested in a trap he assumed was already closed, about the way Ryan had said his little internet money with the laughing emoji, and the way Gerald had offered me $62,000 a year with the benevolence of a man handing a coin to someone he feels mildly sorry for. "I need them to feel completely certain," I said. "I need Gerald to have introduced me to every person in his circle as the man his daughter married. I need Ryan to have made every joke he intends to make at my expense. I need Claudia to have filed the prenup with her solicitor and believed for long enough that everything is proceeding according to her father's plan." I turned the pen over in my hand. "And then I need to stand in Gerald Ashworth's most important room in front of every person whose opinion he values and show them all exactly what they missed." Daniel looked at me for a moment. Not appraisingly, he had assessed me long ago, but with the particular attention of a man confirming something he already knows. "All right," he said quietly. "September 20th, the Meridian Club." "What time do you need me there?" 8:15, I said. "Not 8, 8:15. He wrote it down. He looked up. "Anything else?" "Good paper," I said. "When you print the folder, good paper." A brief, dry pause. "Of course. We married in April." The ceremony was at a country house hotel 40 minutes from the Ashworth estate, 200 guests. Gerald had paid for the reception. He had also, as I have mentioned, organized the seating plan, the flowers, and the music for the first dance. I had let him. It cost me nothing to let him, and the letting cost him, invisibly, considerably more than he understood. The first 6 months of the marriage were a study in careful patience. I attended every Ashworth family dinner. I sat through Gerald's monologues about commercial property cycles and the decline of craftsmanship in modern construction. I absorbed Ryan's remarks, now emboldened by the permanence of my presence, more openly dismissive than they had been during the engagement, with the same quiet neutrality I had always maintained. I smiled at Patricia's stories about the men Claudia might have married. I drank my wine 2/3 full. I observed everything, and I noted what I observed, and I gave no indication in any room and to any person that I was doing either of those things. At work, quietly and without announcement, I made a series of strategic moves. I appointed Priya Mehta as Managing Director of Web Design Associates, a promotion long prepared for, formally confirmed on the 1st of June, and stepped back from the firm's day-to-day operations. My name remained on the door, my equity remained intact, my visibility in the role diminished. To anyone watching from outside, this looked like a man consolidating a modest professional position. It was in fact a man freeing his time for something considerably more significant. I poured that time into Lodestone Systems. By August, we had a working prototype, a letter of intent from a Tier 1 civil engineering group, and the attention of 2 venture capital firms who had tracked our team's framework's history and drawn the obvious inference about what we were capable of building next. The series A Conversation was real. The timeline was firm. The valuation band of $8 to $11 million was, as my co-founders and I privately assessed, conservative. None of this appeared in any document connected to my marriage. None of it was visible to Gerald Ashworth's legal team, to his solicitor Heron, or to the 5-year asset review clause in Section 7 of the prenuptial agreement. The Ashworth Foundation Gala was held annually in the 3rd week of September at the Meridian Club, a private members' establishment in the financial district, occupying the entire 5th floor of a granite-fronted building whose architecture I had always admired. The event drew 200 guests. The city's business establishment, its legal and financial infrastructure, the people whose opinions formed the load-bearing walls of Gerald Ashworth's world. He had been chair of the gala committee for 11 consecutive years. 2 weeks before the event, I called Daniel. September 20th, I said. The Meridian Club, I need you there by 8:15, not 8 o'clock. 8:15, I'll be there, he said. What am I bringing? A folder, I said. Single document, 6 pages. I'll send you the contents this week. I paused. The company valuation certificate from Sterling. The framework's acquisition documentation. The Lodestone Systems provisional valuation from the investment firm, and the title deeds for the Meridian Residential Trust properties. A pause. All of it, all of it. I want them to see the full picture at once. There was a moment of quiet, and then Daniel said, with the restrained satisfaction of a man who appreciates a well-drawn blueprint, understood. And Marcus, the paper will be excellent. I went home. I pressed my dinner jacket. I set the Mont Blanc in its case on the bedside table, and I looked at it for a moment, the same pen, the same weight, the same gold nib that had touched the signature line on page 11 of Gerald Ashworth's most expensive mistake. Then I went to sleep. The Meridian Club in the 3rd week of September. The city in its last warm week before autumn asserted itself definitively, so the light through the tall windows was still amber and long. Candlelight on white tablecloths. The particular hum of 200 well-dressed people performing their own importance for one another. Waiters in black tie moving between tables with the practiced invisibility of people who understand their role in a theater they did not write. We arrived at 7:30. Claudia was in a midnight blue dress I had not seen before. She had described it as a small thing from a boutique on the high street, which I noted, because I had since found the receipt folded into the pocket of her coat. $1,840 on our joint credit card 3 days after she had asked me to cover the household account while hers rebalanced. I had, of course, covered it without comment. I had also, of course, noted it. Gerald was at the center of the room when we entered, holding court with the natural authority of a man in his own kingdom. He was in white tie, which at these events Gerald always wore when others did not, a small dominance display I had catalogued and set aside. He saw us enter. He smiled at Claudia with the warm, unguarded smile he reserved for his family. He nodded at me. "Marcus," he said, "good of you to come." "Always a pleasure, Gerald," I said. Ryan was at the bar with 2 men I did not recognize, late 20s, the easy physicality of people for whom socializing has always been abundant and cost-free. He raised his glass when he saw me. "The architect," he said to his companions with a slight widening of the eyes that communicated, efficiently and without any single deniable word, that I was a figure of mild collective amusement. I smiled. I accepted a glass from a passing waiter. I held it 2/3 full. Claudia steered me toward a group of her mother's friends near the far window. I followed. I was calm. I had been calm for months, and the calm now had a quality I recognized from the very best professional moments of my career. The moment before you walk a client through a completed building for the first time. The complete, quiet certainty of a man who has checked every measurement twice and knows, without requiring anyone to tell him, that what they are about to see is exactly what he promised them it would be. I checked my watch at 7:58. Daniel would arrive at 8:15. Gerald's annual address to the room, the speech he gave every year which combined charity fundraising with a performance of personal and professional eminence, was scheduled for 8:30. I had 17 minutes. I used them to say very little, to listen carefully, and to stand with my hands loosely clasped in front of me while the room moved around me like weather around a structure it cannot shift. At 8:14, Gerald tapped me on the shoulder. "Marcus, a word before I go up." He drew me slightly aside, toward the windows, with the smooth authority of a man who has been organizing other people's positions in rooms for his entire adult life. His voice was low, collegial, the voice he used when he wanted to sound like a reasonable man. "I've been speaking to some of my partners," he said. "The project liaison position, we'd like to formalize the offer this week if possible. We think it would be good for the family, good for you in terms of stability." A beat. "Claudia agrees, by the way. She thinks a proper salary structure would be good for the 2 of you going forward. The architecture business, the small firm model, it's a difficult world. We'd just like to see you on solid ground." Solid ground, there it was again. I looked at him for a moment. "Thank you, Gerald," I said. "I think we should talk about that this evening, all of us together. I have some things I'd like the family to be aware of." He blinked, slightly wrong-footed. The hand not holding his glass made a brief, involuntary adjustment. "Of course," he said. "After the address, perhaps?" "After the address," I agreed. At 8:15 exactly, Daniel Vance walked through the door of the Meridian Club in a charcoal suit, carrying a slim leather document case. He surveyed the room with the quiet precision of a man who has prepared for every contingency. He caught my eye from 30 feet away. He nodded once. I nodded back. Gerald's address began at 8:30. I stood at the table with Claudia and listened to it in full. It was, by his standards, a particularly polished performance. He thanked the foundation's donors. He spoke about the importance of the city's business community taking long-term responsibility for its people. He made a joke about architects, a reference to the new civic library, whose extension had come in over budget and behind schedule, which he described as what happens when you let the visionaries do the accounting. The room laughed warmly. Several people glanced in my direction with the particular look of people checking whether the target has noticed. I smiled pleasantly. I held my glass 2/3 full. After the applause, in the warm, convivial afterglow of a man who has just reminded a room of 200 people why they respect him, Gerald returned to the table. He looked at me. I had not moved. I was standing with my hands loosely clasped, and something in my posture, some quality of absolute, unmoved stillness, made him pause just fractionally before he sat. "You wanted to say something?" he said. "I did," I said. "If the family is gathered and I see Ryan is just behind you, I think now is as good a time as any." Claudia looked at me. Ryan moved forward slightly, glass in hand, wearing the expression of a man who anticipates entertainment at someone else's expense. "Marcus," Claudia said quietly, not a warning exactly, not quite pleading, something in between. "It's all right," I said, and I meant it completely. I reached into my jacket pocket. I took out the Mont Blanc. I set it on the table. The small, precise sound of lacquer on white linen was quieter than everything else in the room. But the four people standing at that table all looked at it, involuntarily, in the way people look at a thing that has just arrived in their peripheral vision and whose significance they cannot yet read. I looked at Gerald. "You asked me to sign a prenuptial agreement," I said. 11 pages, drafted by Heron and Partners, delivered to my office in March. You paid $4,200 to have it prepared. I paused. I signed it, as you know. At this table with this pen, I touched the Mont Blanc lightly. What you may not know is that before I signed it, I had it reviewed in full by my own legal counsel, Daniel Vance, who I believe some of you may have encountered professionally, and who is standing near the entrance to this room right now. I looked across the room, and Gerald followed my gaze to where Daniel stood, document case in hand, watching with calm, unhurried attention. A slight pallor crossed Gerald's face, not dramatic, not theatrical, just the brief, involuntary shift that happens when a man suddenly becomes uncertain about the integrity of something he was certain about. Daniel identified several matters the agreement did not address, I continued. Matters relating to assets held in corporate trust established prior to the marriage and therefore outside the agreement's legal scope. Ryan let out a short, uncertain laugh. It was a different sound from his usual laugh, higher, less anchored. What is this?" Gerald said nothing. He was looking at me with the complete, focused attention of a man who has just realized he may have made a structural error in something he believed to be solid. 6 years ago, I said, I co-founded an architectural design automation company called Framework Systems. You will have seen the name, Gerald. The platform is used by 14 of the largest construction groups on the continent, including, I believe, 2 of your own co-investment partners. I let that sit for a moment. 2 years ago, Frameworks was acquired by Sterling Build Group. My founding stake was 63%. After fees and taxes, my proceeds from the acquisition were $2.96 million. That capital is held in a structured investment account under a holding company. It does not appear in your prenuptial agreement, not once, because you did not know it existed. I looked at him steadily. And because you did not know it existed, you did not think to reach for it. Claudia had gone completely still. The kind of stillness that is not calm, the stillness of a structure whose load-bearing assumption has just been shown to be wrong. Gerald's mouth opened, then closed, with the slightly mechanical quality of a man whose next sentence has mislaid itself entirely. Ryan said, almost involuntarily, his little internet money. His voice had a different texture now. Not contemptuous, not amused, just flat and slightly strangled and immediately aware of itself. Yes, I said. I looked at him with complete calm. That is exactly what you called it. In the family group chat on the 14th of February, along with the suggestion that I consider a career as a barista and the link to the article about the firm in receivership, I took my phone from my pocket and set it face up on the table beside the pen. The screenshot was open and readable. I kept a record, I said, from the engagement dinner onward, every remark, every message, every toast. I looked at Gerald. Every job offer. Patricia Ashworth, who had been standing slightly behind Gerald, put her hand very quietly over her mouth. Daniel arrived at the table at this moment, as arranged, as timed, with the quiet precision of a man who has spent a professional lifetime arriving in the right room at the right moment. He set the leather document case on the table without a word. He stepped back exactly one pace. He folded his hands in front of him and said nothing. I opened the case. Inside, the Lodestone Systems Provisional Valuation Certificate from the investment firm, the framework's acquisition documentation from the Sterling transaction, and the title deeds for the 8 properties held under Meridian Residential Trust, 8 residential units across 3 postcodes, total current market value $2.31 million, generating $341,000 per year in rental income, managed through a holding company that had operated for 4 years without any member of the Ashworth family having the faintest awareness of its existence. I set the documents on the table in a single neat stack. I did not slam them. I did not raise my voice. I placed them with the quiet precision of a man who has measured twice and is now, finally, cutting once. The property portfolio, I said, 8 units, 4 years of operation, also entirely absent from your prenuptial agreement. I looked at Gerald directly. And there is a third company, a structural analysis software platform called Lodestone Systems, currently in pre-Series A funding. The investment firm's provisional valuation band is between $8 and $11 million, also not in the prenup, also not reachable by the 5-year asset review clause in Section 7. I paused for one beat. The agreement you paid $4,200 to draft, Gerald, the agreement designed to ensure that I left this marriage with only what I brought into it, is a perfectly precise document. It captures exactly and only what you believed I had. It cannot touch a single thing I actually own. The silence around the table had a physical quality, a density, the way silence does in a building after something structural gives way. The noise of the room continued around us, 200 people, candlelight, the steady murmur of other people's evenings proceeding undisturbed. But at this table in this circle there was nothing. Claudia was looking at me. Her face had a quality I had not seen in the 14 months I had dated her or the 6 months I had been married to her. Not anger, not shame, something more fundamental than either. The expression of a person who has made a calculation they were absolutely certain of and has just discovered all at once and in public that the numbers were wrong. Gerald said, "Marcus," just the name, nothing after it. "I don't want anything from you, Gerald," I said. "I am not here to take something, I am here to correct something." I picked up the Mont Blanc from the table. I looked at it for a moment, the gold nibs, the black resin barrel, the precise familiar weight of it. The pen that had signed the framework's contracts. The pen that had signed the property deeds. The pen that had signed the prenup at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in March while my coffee went cold beside me. You asked me to sign a document that you believed would leave me without recourse. You offered me a job paying $62,000 a year because you believed that was the natural ceiling of my value. You made a toast, "Every foundation starts somewhere," in front of 112 people you wanted to see me diminished in front of. I looked at him with the complete, final steadiness of a man standing on ground that he knows will not move. I wanted those people to have the rest of the information, that is all. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be precise about that because it is the thing I have been asked about most often in the time since, and the honest answer is the only one I have. I stood at that table in the Meridian Club in front of the 200 people who formed the walls of Gerald Ashworth's world, and I felt nothing so clean or so simple as triumph. What I felt was closer to the sensation I have always associated with the completion of a sound structural survey, a quiet, confirming rightness, the knowledge that what was built will hold, that the weight is where it should be, that the foundation, however slowly and carefully laid, was laid well. I pocketed the pen. I looked at Claudia one final time. She did not look away. Neither did I then. I picked up my glass, still 2/3 full, set it gently on the table, and walked without hurry toward the door. What followed the gala was not dramatic. Consequences rarely are in their immediate aftermath. They accrue slowly and at their own pace, the way structural damage does, invisible first, obvious eventually, permanent always. Gerald Ashworth's position on the Foundation Gala Committee was not renewed for the following year. I was not responsible for that outcome and did not seek it. His business partners, two of whom had been in the room at the Meridian Club that evening, and whose co-investment relationship with the Ashworth Group depended in part on their continued assessment of Gerald's judgment, had their own calculations to make about a man who had miscalculated a situation of that magnitude in quite so public a fashion. The Ashworth Group lost two co-investment partnerships in the following 6 months. Gerald retained the rest. His empire did not collapse, but it contracted measurably and permanently, and every person in his world who needed to know about the contraction knew about it. Ryan Ashworth deleted the group chat the morning after the gala. He did not contact me again. His job title at the Ashworth Group changed twice in the following year, both changes lateral, neither accompanied by any increase in the actual authority the title represented. He posted considerably less on social media. When he did post, there were no captions about architects. Patricia Ashworth called Claudia 3 times in the week after the gala. I know this because Claudia told me we were still living in the same house, in the peculiar suspended state of a marriage that has not yet formally ended but has shifted in a way that cannot be undone, the way a building shifts after a foundation event. Patricia did not call me, I did not expect her to, and I did not require it. The prenuptial agreement, which Gerald's lawyers had drafted so carefully and at such expense, was reviewed by Daniel Vance and found to function exactly as I had described at the gala. In the divorce proceedings, which Claudia initiated 4 months later, quietly, through her own solicitor, without confrontation, it governed precisely what it said it governed and reached precisely as far as its terms permitted. My directorship income from Webb Design Associates, my named commercial commissions, my personal bank accounts as of the date of signing, Frameworks Holdings, Meridian Residential Trust, Lodestone Systems, untouched. Claudia's own solicitor, upon reviewing the full picture, reportedly described the agreement as a net with very large holes. I am told she said it more than once and with increasing feeling, and that Gerald received this information at a dinner he had arranged to discuss strategy and left early without finishing his meal. The settlement was clean and it was proportional, and it was handled by Daniel with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. Claudia received the marital home, a property that fell squarely within the agreement's scope, and a financial settlement her lawyers described as fair. She retained her family, she retained her name, she retained, as far as I could assess from a distance, her dignity, if not her certainty. I retained everything that the agreement could not see. Well, Daniel said on the day the papers were signed. A difficult business, but cleanly executed. Thank you, Daniel, I said. Don't thank me, he said. You did the work, I just made sure the structure held. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 8 months after the divorce was finalized. Hand-delivered to my office by a courier in a plain white envelope with Claudia's handwriting on the front, small, careful letters, the handwriting of someone who had thought before they wrote and thought again before they sent. I opened it at my desk with the cup of coffee going cold beside me in the same way it had gone cold the morning I signed the prenup at the kitchen table 3 years earlier. It felt in some obscure and unplanned way like a completion of something whose shape I had not fully understood until I could see both ends of it. The letter was 2 pages. I will not reproduce it in full. Some things are not for audiences, even long after they have ceased to be entirely private. But I will tell you what it was and what it was not. It was not a request. It did not ask for anything, not a second chance, not forgiveness, not contact. It did not offer excuses or frame the situation in the particular self-serving way of people who apologize while maintaining their fundamental innocence. It began, I am not writing this to ask you for anything. I am writing it because I have thought about it for a long time and I believe you deserve to know that I understand what I did. She described the phone call her father had made and the phone call I had overheard and the strategy she had allowed herself to be part of without. She wrote this carefully, fully examining what that meant for the man she was marrying. She did not blame her father. She did not position herself as a victim of his influence. She said simply that she had let his way of measuring people become her way of measuring people, and that she had not stopped to ask whether the measurement was accurate or kind or true. She wrote, I think about the harbor window. I think about who I was in that conversation and who I allowed myself to stop being somewhere in the years between then and the Meridian Club. I think I was more that person than I let myself remain. I am sorry for the distance between them. I read the letter twice. I folded it carefully along its original creases. I placed it in the desk drawer beside the Mont Blanc in its case, where it remains. I did not reply. There was nothing to reply to. The letter asked for nothing and required no answer, which was, I recognized, a quality that had taken considerable honesty to achieve. But I did not discard it, and I did not delete it, and I am aware that both of those choices say something about who I am trying to be on the other side of all of this. Lodestone Systems completed its Series A funding round 14 months after the gala. The final valuation came in at $9.4 million. We are currently preparing for a Series B that neither I nor my co-founders are prepared to characterize as anything other than a significant development. Web Design Associates, under Priya Mehta's direction, secured two of the most significant commissions in the firm's history in the past year, including a civic arts center that is, in its early design stages, the kind of project I spent the early years of my career studying from the outside, pressing my nose against the glass of. The kind of building that exists because someone thought in structures and then built accordingly. The property portfolio continues to perform as designed. The Meridian Residential Trust continues to operate with the quiet, unmarked efficiency of a thing that was built properly and is doing what it was built to do. I live alone in a flat in the north of the city with large windows that face east. In the mornings, the light comes in at a particular angle across the wooden floor, and I sit with my coffee, usually warm, occasionally not, and I do not, for an hour, think about foundations or structures or load-bearing walls or any of the architecture of my professional or personal life. For an hour every morning, I think about nothing that requires building. That, perhaps more than anything I have constructed in the years since, is the thing I am most quietly proud of. The story of Marcus Webb is, at its core, a story about the difference between a man's visible surface and his actual structure. It is a story about what happens when people who pride themselves on understanding value encounter someone whose value they were never calibrated to measure correctly. Gerald Ashworth was not, I think, an evil man. He was a man who had built an entire world on a single metric, visible wealth, the kind that announces itself, and had forgotten or perhaps never thought to ask whether that metric captured everything worth knowing. He saw a mid-earning architect and made the oldest and most expensive mistake in the history of estimation. He assumed that what he could see was all there was to see. The prenuptial agreement was not a weapon, it was a mirror. It reflected with the precision of legally binding language the exact and total extent of what the Ashworths believed I was, and in reflecting that, it drew a boundary around everything they had missed. A net, as Daniel later described it, with very large holes, and through those holes, undisturbed and undiminished, passed everything I had spent 6 years quietly building. My father told me, build slowly, build well. Never show a man the full weight of what you are carrying until you know exactly what he intends to do with the knowledge. The best architecture is invisible until the moment it needs to hold. In the end, everything held. I want to leave you with a question because I have turned it over myself many times and I do not have a clean answer. Was I wrong to wait? Was I wrong to spend 6 months inside a marriage I knew was compromised, attending dinners, absorbing remarks, building my case, rather than confronting Claudia privately, directly, the night I stood in the hallway and heard the phone call? There are days when I believe I was entirely right, that the public nature of the reckoning was necessary precisely because the humiliation had always been public. The toasts, the group chat, the Instagram post, the room full of people laughing at a joke made at my expense. That Gerald Ashworth's world had witnessed the diminishment, and Gerald Ashworth's world was owed the correction. There are other days when I wonder whether the gala, the timing, the staging, Daniel arriving at 8:15 with the good paper, was something I told myself was about justice, but was at least partly about something smaller. The need to be seen, the need to have the room understand what had been underestimated. I don't know. I think that's the honest answer, and I think honest answers are more valuable than clean ones. What do you think? When someone has been deceived and underestimated and has the means to respond, is a public reckoning justice, or is it something else wearing justice's clothes? We read every comment and we want to know where you stand. If this story moved you, if you found yourself somewhere in Marcus's patience, in his father's advice, in the harbor window, or in the complicated space of Claudia's letter, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Thank you genuinely for being here.